Green Party 2024 candidate Cornel West criticized Bernie Sanders earlier this month for his 2024 endorsement of President Joe Biden. Let's play some of that.
I love the brother, and you know, even in love, people have deep disagreements about these things. But I think, again, he's fearful of the neo-fascism of Trump. People look at Biden, they don't really want to tell the full truth. He's created the best economy that we can get. Is this the best that we can get? You're going to tell that lie to the people just for Biden to win?
Now, this weekend, Senator Sanders responded to these criticisms on CNN. Let's watch that.
So this certainly is not the best economy that we can create. That was what my speech was about yesterday. We've got to join the rest of the industrialized world, guarantee health care to all. We've got to cut the cost of prescription drugs in half. We've got to raise the minimum wage to at least $17 an hour. We've got to build the affordable housing we desperately need. But where I disagree with my good friend, Cornel West, is I think in these really very difficult times where there is a real question whether democracy is going to remain in the United States of America. You know, Donald Trump is not somebody who believes in democracy, whether women are going to be able to continue to control their own bodies, whether we have social justice in America, we end bigotry. Around that, I think we have got to bring the entire progressive community to defeat Trump or whoever the Republican nominee will be, support Biden, but at the same time, which is what I did yesterday, is demand that the Democratic Party, not just Biden, have the guts to take on corporate greed and the massive levels of income and wealth inequality that we see today.
Yeah, Bernie was in Iowa, I believe, recently, making the case for Biden. Biden is summoning every weapon at his disposal to make the case that you should not be disaffected or disillusioned or disappointed or any other dis-word with the administration. And it's amazing. The squad members all obviously, now your former boss too. Back in Biden, he doesn't even sound pretty conflicted about it. Like I would love to support Cornel West, but it's just like, well, no, we got to back Biden.
We got to beat Trump. So here is, I think, what's so interesting. Bernie Sanders seems to sidestep in some ways the crux of Cornel West's criticism, which is if you admit that we don't have the best possible economy under Biden, that Biden could have done other things and done them differently to put Americans in a better position economically than they are now, then where have been the calls to do exactly that? And what mechanisms are at your disposal as a senator at the United States Senate to pressure Joe Biden to do some of the things on that list that Bernie articulated there? He referenced a $17 minimum wage. Well, that sounds great, but even the $15 minimum wage that was Biden's promise and part of Bernie's demand as he was conceding back in 2020, one of the only things that Bernie very specifically asked for during that first a Zoom call between Biden and Bernie in the spring of 2020, was Biden's firm promise to pass a $15 minimum wage. And people who only consume, mainstream corporate media might not realize this, but it absolutely was possible for Joe Biden to keep the $15 minimum wage as part of his first COVID relief bill. But I don't know if you guys remember, I talk about this a lot on my show. There was this whole bait and switch where the parliamentarian, this unelected person who has no control over the Senate activities, who just gives advisory positions, a person who Bush fired, I think, a couple of times in order to do things like expand drilling in the Arctic, et cetera. She issued an advisory opinion saying you couldn't include the $15 minimum wage in that must-pass bill. So Chuck Schumer took it out. And that's how we got that whole dance where Bernie Sanders tried to get it reattached to the bill, but it went from being a 50+1 vote as part of the budget reconciliation process when it was all lumped into the one major COVID relief bill to needing 60 votes to get it back into the bill. So it was a hurdle that he couldn't overcome. So we never even got an up-down vote on a very popular policy like a $15 minimum wage, a policy that's so popular that Florida in 2020, as it voted for Donald Trump, also passed a $15 minimum wage by ballot measure. So knowing that Chuck Schumer, and with, I'm sure, absolutely Joe Biden's consent, rigged the process to make sure that we weren't going to have an up-down vote by Congress on a $15 minimum wage, is now sitting here telling progressives and working class people across the country not to look at third-party alternatives, seeing with their own eyes how the Democratic Party has consistently rigged the process along the way. And not only rigged the process on various policy matters like a $15 minimum wage, but on elections as a whole, where you see the Democratic Party saying we're not going to have debates, seeing the Democratic Party trying to change the debate schedule, primary schedule to advantage Joe Biden specifically, see them try to knock ranked choice voting off of the ballot whenever it rears its head, because the people understand that they don't want to be constrained by the possibility of electing Trump. They want to be able to vote for their favorite person and then vote for their number two to stop Trump, if you will. But the Democratic Party knows that if they allow ranked choice voting, then they won't be able to get on TV and do what Bernie Sanders just did, which is to use the threat of the big bad guy on the other side as a cudgel to prevent them from voting their values.
On minimum wage, what happens if my labor is not worth $15 an hour? Maybe it's only worth $13 an hour.
That's an interesting question that you can take up with the people of Florida that voted for a $15 minimum wage.
Well,
although it's not really a mystery, because most
coherent.
states in the United States of America have voluntarily lifted their minimum wage well above the $7.50 an hour, where it's been since 2009, the longest period in American history without a minimum wage
Probably a lot
raise.
of people don't want to compete with maybe younger, greener people who are willing to take less money, and the employer would be willing to pay them, and it has a nice little consensual arrangement. The government comes in and says, no, you can't do that. Not my favorite policy, as you know. But
yeah, so the question is, is Bernie Sanders even going to be especially effective in trying to whip his base to this end? Because obviously there's a very online part of the left that I am a part of, and I visualize, who were furious at Bernie Sanders over the weekend for these comments. But of course, his enormous coalition that had about 30% of the Democratic Party vote share in 2020, who might turn on the TV and look at this, I think that they will credibly just follow his lead. And is that a problem for an emergent left movement?
Well, now during a different appearance over on MSNBC, Sanders and host Chuck Todd traded barbs over the state of the 2024 race.
Are you trying to discourage Cornel West from running?
Well, I've known Cornel for many, many years. He's a very independent-minded guy. He will do what he wants to do. I just think, again, I think Cornel or anybody else can play an important role now about raising issues that are not always discussed. But at the end of the day, I think the progressive community in general and the American people have got to make a decision as to whether we stand for democracy or authoritarianism, or whether or not we're going to represent working class families. And
one of your chief political advisors is concerned that Cornel West is being taken advantage of by maybe people that simply want his name on the ballot. Do you have those concerns?
I really haven't followed it that closely.
Yeah, I don't want to, exaggerate anything Bernie Sanders said there, because it wasn't all that inflammatory. But he's talking about the importance of democracy. But maybe it would be better if there were fewer candidates. How is that a Democrat? Obviously there's going to be a Green Party nominee, like the Green Party, the Libertarian Party, the other third parties aren't going to just sit this one out. And if you really think it's important for them to sit this one out, are you advancing a Democratic argument or an argument in favor of democracy? Maybe you're advancing a Democratic, as in the Democratic Party argument, but you're not really defending the people's right to choose.
Sounds like
I'm not beating up on him, because he was the moderators wanted him to go that direction. He went a little bit that direction, but
it sounds like the kind of democracy advanced by our great ally Zelensky, who shut down opponent political parties in order to advance his own interests.
Yes, and independent media, et cetera.
It's not the kind of democracy that I value, and it is disappointing to hear Bernie Sanders say that, specifically because you can go back. People were circulating a clip of him in maybe the 80s or 90s, making exactly the argument that leftists are arguing today about the need for democracy and the value of third parties, and why the spoiler effect is malarkey.
All right, we will have more Rising right after this. Please stay with us.